Good afternoon, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Sydney Keene. I am a policy fellow with the Women's Policy Institute. I'm also a campaign professional. I would like to speak on 3 bills, the 2 ranked choice vote bills. And
by all means, go right ahead.
Okay. So quickly, first of all, on the Voting Rights Act, you have heard plenty of testimony in terms of why this is an essential bill. I want to speak to the urgency, why it is important that we pass it now. So in 2019, many of us who are in this very committee room were here testifying on and advocating for the Reproductive Privacy Act, which was a very long push, and one of the things that we faced a lot was was the argument that it wasn't urgent and it wasn't necessary because Roe versus Wade was already in place. What happened a few years later? Roe versus Wade is no longer with us. And so that was a case that showed us that it is vital that we codify these protections, even if we think that they are, in place at the federal level. We need to codify them at the state level because we can't depend on these the rights continuing to be in place and continuing to be enforced. The bill does have an effective date of January 1st, 2027, and I want to touch on the fact that I think it's really important that especially the voter intimidation piece go into effect prior to this coming election cycle. So I think that the Campaign Legal Center's representative spoke on some of the proposed amendments, and that is one of them. I think that this should go into effect on passage. But we really can't wait. We need to codify protections against voter intimidation now. And very quickly on ranked choice voting, plurality elections have the effect of chilling participation in our democracy. When we have more than 2 candidates, we often come up against the argument that the vote is going to be split. In particular, in 2023, I worked on the congressional race to replace Congressman David Cicilline. There were 12 candidates on the ballot, 3 of whom were Latino women. It was a very exciting, should have been a win for democracy, just the very fact that 25% of that field was immigrant women. And instead, almost the first thing that was out of anybody's mouth, one of them was Senator Quesada. Almost one of the first arguments that was out of anybody's mouth was that they would split the Latino vote. And that should never be on the table. So ranked choice voting would help to amend that. That would allow voters to see more flourishing fields of candidates in our elections. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Keene? Seeing none, thank you all. Appreciate your testimony. At this time, we'll call up Tara Hayes, Catherine Tiley, Amy Yozura, and Angela Lima. And we will start on my left. If you could,
Hi.
Please proceed. Welcome to the Senate.
Good evening, Senate Judiciary members, Chair. My name is Tara Hayes, and I am a mom of 3. My oldest son, Andrew, has a lot of medical challenges, and that's why I am here today to testify in front of you about Senate Bill 3143, the Voting Rights Act. Andrew was born with a lot of challenges. We weren't sure how his upbringing was going to go. He currently is medically fragile, has a trach, has a ventilator, is non-ambulatory, non-verbal, but cognitively he is well. and he just turned 18 in February. So now he has the right to vote. Andrew is a very opinionated child. He knows what he wants, he knows what he likes, he knows what he doesn't want, what he doesn't like, and he's able to express those things in certain ways, but not in the typical way. Because he doesn't have physical movement, because he doesn't have speech, he uses his eyes and an eye gaze device to communicate. Obviously, some of us who know him better can just look at him and kind of, he'll give us an eye roll or a yes or a no or things like that. But the Voting Rights Act is really important to me, and I know you'll hear a lot of things about different reasons why it's important to different people, and I feel like I wanted to bring up this perspective because nonverbal doesn't mean non-thinking, and nonverbal doesn't mean non-understanding. And he, like everyone else in this state, is a constituent. He has a right to vote, and I would really like to be able to see supports put in place to support other populations who don't just speak English or the top 2 languages in the state to be able to engage in their civic duty and their civic right. So he currently is a student at Pilgrim. He is learning a lot. He loves history. He loves engaging with other folks and networking. Doesn't love to use the eye gaze device because it's always directly in front of his face, and so he can't, talk to other people that way. He finds it better to have that face-to-face communication. But I feel like this bill is a step in the right direction to support our citizens who are coming of age and are able to have, opinions and thoughts and feelings, and should have the opportunity and the right to vote like all of us that are adults in this state. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes, for the personal story that illustrates your concerns. Any questions, Ms. Hayes? Seeing none, we'll move on. Is it Ms. Dilley?
Good evening. My name is... Oh, it's on. Good evening. My name is Catherine Tiley. I'm a resident of Cranston, Rhode Island, and I'm also a fellow of the Women's Policy Institute with the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. And I am here to express my strong support for Senate Bill 3143, the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act, as well as my support for the amendments that the Campaign Legal Center proposed to this bill. A personal connection. I've been with my fiance, Brian, for 11 years now, and over those years, I've gotten to know his family, who are originally from Guatemala and speak Spanish as their first and primary language. As I've gotten to know them, they've lived in Rhode Island for decades now. I've learned that they are incredibly selfless, caring, and extremely hardworking Rhode Islanders. Many of them have spent years fighting for their citizenship, and as eligible voters, they have a right to understand what it is they vote for. Rhode Island is incredibly diverse, and it serves as a safe haven to many immigrants who are pursuing the American dream. And part of that dream is to have the ability to vote in our democracy. However, presently, access to voting is under attack in our country. For years, we have watched as the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 is being dismantled, and now we watch as the current administration is trying to further limit our access to voting. We need to do something now, and that something is pass the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act. This bill will codify and expand upon the existing protections in the Federal Voting Rights Act, including expanding language access in voting. This would include implementing a 2-tier system where certain towns and cities that meet a 5 or 3% threshold of a certain population of limited English proficient voters will be required to provide these voters with translated voting materials and allow these voters to receive assistance on the day they vote from a trusted individual of their choice. Passing this bill will make voting in Rhode Island truly accessible and fair to all Rhode Islanders. Don't let our fundamental rights be compromised. Please pass the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tiley. Questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to Ms. Yuzur.
Good afternoon, Chair LaMountain and members of the Senate Committee on Judiciary. My name is Amy Yozura. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I'm also a proud Rhode Islander. I'm a current fellow at the Women's Policy Institute through the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, and I support the Senate Bill 3143, the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act. As a mom, I think a lot about the world my kids will inherit. I want them to grow up in a Rhode Island where no eligible voter is intimidated or made to feel that their voice doesn't matter. All across the country, we've seen potential legislation proposed to make it harder to vote. For example, we see legislation proposed for women who have changed their last name and now could potentially be required to take extra steps just to register to vote. If they have, these proposed laws will disenfranchise eligible voters. Alternatively, this legislation, the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act, will protect all of your constituents. Let's be very clear about what this bill is. It does not change who can vote or how we vote, but it preserves the accessibility and accountability. The Rhode Island Voting Rights Act ensures that our elections stay fair to open to all eligible voters. It protects every community, and it gives us the tools to challenge discrimination or voter suppression right here in our state. The bill favors access to review, not one-sided outcomes. At a time where we cannot always rely on the federal government for protection, we must look to our state. Rhode Island must pass this bill now to protect our eligible voters during the upcoming elections this fall. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move over to your left or right. Welcome to Senate Judiciary. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Angela Lima. I am the Chief of Governmental Relations with the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, and I am here in support of Senate Bill 3143, the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act, based on its focus on equal access and predictable administration of elections. We are also supporting the proposed amendments issued from Common Cause Rhode Island, not as a partisan measure, but as a sound public policy grounded in clear standards. For some of you who may or may not know, I also served as a former elected official for the city of Newport. And so in 2020, I was running my second campaign in the city of Newport. And like everyone else, we were navigating the uncertainty of COVID. But what my community faced went far beyond public health concerns. Out of 9 polling locations in Newport, the Board of Canvassers identified one location as a serious risk. They argued that the voters at this specific location would undoubtedly contract COVID if it remained open. The polling place was in my community. It served a neighborhood with a high concentration of low-income families. It sat directly on a bus route, making it accessible to people without reliable transportation. It was a place where differently abled residents relied on proximity and familiarity. And it represented one of the most racially and ethnically diverse populations in the city. While other communities were able to move forward with their campaigns, my community had to fight just to keep our polling place open. We showed up not once, but 6 times. 3 times before the Board of Canvassers and 3 times before the Board of Elections. 6 times asking for the same basic thing, equal access to vote in our own neighborhood. And each time, we had to prove that our voters matter just as much as anyone else. What made it so difficult wasn't just the decision itself, it was the lack of clear standards. There was no consistent framework for determining whether a polling place closure would disproportionately impact a specific community, no requirement to measure the burden placed on voters who would have had to travel farther, navigate unfamiliar locations, or risk losing access altogether. That's exactly why the legislation like the Rhode Island Voting Rights Act matters, because what we experienced wasn't just an isolated decision, it was a gap in the system. This act creates a standard. It says that when decisions are made about elections, whether it's polling locations, access, or procedures, we must look at the real impact on communities, especially those who are historically underserved. It ensures no single neighborhood has to carry the disproportionate burden just to participate in democracy. In this framework, sorry, I will finish up. In this framework, if this framework had been in place in 2020, my community wouldn't have had to fight 6 times to be heard. The impact would have been measured from the beginning, the burden would have been recognized, and the outcome could have been more fair, more transparent, and more consistent. This isn't about politics.
All right, can we just final thoughts?
I just 10 more seconds, I promise. This isn't about politics. It's about making sure that access to voting doesn't depend on where you live, how much you make, or whether your community has the right resources to fight back. Because no community should have to prove over and over again
Right,
that they
thank you.
deserve equal access. Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony.
They have to struggle every day just to exist in a world that does not want to see them to begin with. They are a truly patriotic person, and they love the state in which they reside. We are looking to ensure that these brave citizens have the same rights as all eligible voters, and with ease. I want all of us to be seen. I want all who do not necessarily align with their birth markers to be heard. I want no fear of harm or retaliation at the polls for my dear friend and all who dare to live their authentic selves. I want to protect the fact that the birth certificate that they have now with their chosen legal name, which is changed legally, is enough to vote with and with honor. The courage and strength it takes to live the life needed to survive and thrive should not be a barrier in voting. Rhode Island needs to codify the RIVRA now to protect our most vulnerable state residents, these humans we love and honor. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Hannah Meza-Irvin, and I'm here to support the Rhode Island Voters' Rights Act. I live in Providence, and I work as an investigator at an employment law firm. In my work, I see what happens when there are systems that are meant to protect people, but in practice, they're confusing and inconsistent. I don't see people rushing to complain or bring claims. I see people hesitate. They assume that they've misunderstood something or that complaining isn't worth it, and over time, they disengage. I think the same thing happens with voting. For a lot of people, especially immigrants like myself or first-time voters, voting is not straightforward. There can be language barriers, unclear rules, and a real concern about getting things wrong. I felt that myself. I'm trying to navigate systems that I didn't grow up in, and I never completely sure that I'm doing things the right way. I know there's been some concern that this bill would encourage complaints or litigation. And from my perspective, working in a law firm, that's not the case. Having a way to challenge something doesn't mean that people will misuse it. It just means there's a clear process if something goes wrong. Access to rights means very little if people don't feel able to use it. What this bill does is make the system more consistent and more transparent. The bill's not about creating new rights, it's about making sure the rights that already exist can be used in practice. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions?